Hello everyone, and welcome to the 34th episode of Chin-Quee Chats, the bite-sized podcast where we talk movies, sports, and everything in between. I am your host, Matthew Chin-Quee, and this week I am again joined by a fellow podcaster. This guy actually helped put the podcast together initially, almost a year ago now. Mr. DeVaughn Taylor, aka Jesus. How you doing, DeVaughn?
I'm doing pretty good, my man. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, I know you've had this going on for forever, and I was just thinking last week, I was like, man, I really want to be on Chin-Quee Chats. I'm like, what the heck's going on?
Yeah, there was a moment there a couple months ago, or even
we did try.
Yeah, and it's just been so busy lately. I'm just starting to get back into the groove of things and really try to push guests more because I can do solo episodes, but I'm sure you can attest to this. It's harder to do solo episodes than it is to do one with a guest.
Oh yeah, like I totally agree. My podcast, I always, kind of alternate between solo episodes and a guest, and it's like solo episodes, there's all this pressure on you to like be entertaining, like by yourself the whole time. You don't really have like any breaks or like nothing to bounce off of. So yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah, I remember I had a solo episode a couple weeks ago that. It must have, I only recorded for like half an hour. It must have taken me like an hour and a half. I sat there and I paused, erased, re-recorded, paused, and just did that over and over because I just did not like what I was saying. I was super frustrating.
I've done the exact same thing.
So for this week, DeVaughn is a huge horror fan, for those of you guys don't know, so we are going to talk about, in the cinema chat, we're going to talk about the modern resurgence of horror and kind of how it's almost taken over the industry now in all facets. And then in the free chat segment, if you guys couldn't tell, DeVaughn is a pretty experienced podcaster, and without tooting my horn too much, I think that I've got enough experience on him about that. We want to talk a little bit about how to podcast for beginners and just talk about the entire world and community of podcasting, because there is a lot to it. So we're going to take a really quick break and then go right into the cinema chat. We'll be right back. And we are back for the Cinema Chat segment where we are going to talk about some horror movies. Now, as you guys know, I am not the biggest horror guy because I get scared. I'm scared of the Muppets. So I think that I think
everybody is a little bit scared of the Muppets, like on some sort of level.
I'm just saying, I do not want to see that room where they keep them. I don't want to walk into the room and just see Miss Piggy's lifeless body sitting there. That's not me. I get scared. But I'm scared of almost everything, so I don't watch many horror movies, but these days it's kind of hard to avoid it. There's a lot of huge critically acclaimed horror movies. There's the smaller indie horror movies that have always been there, that have really been getting a lot of press, and they're even kind of going into the genre movies now. DeVaughn, as a big horror guy, what is a movie that really has stood out for you over the past 2-3 years?
So, nothing has made me happier than the past, I'd say about the past 3-4 years, is what has been this kind of horror resurgence. That's been great. We are out here taking over. We got the awards now. We got the box office, the horror's been crushing the box office too. And, I'd say I always kind of loop it back whenever people ask similar questions like this. I say The Conjuring in 2013 is kind of what kicked off this resurgence. That and Insidious, I think they both came out around the same year or within a year or so of each other. But the first Conjuring movie, I think really kind of kicked off because it was this kind of, you had James Wan who made these smaller films, and then it was kind of like a mid-budget. It was it's a Blumhouse film, and it was kind of what kicked off Blumhouse's uber successful business model as well. But The Conjuring, it was a great combination of, it was scary, but it had themes to it. It had good performances and big names in it, which is something that we hadn't had in a while. Like, having star power in horror movies again. Usually it's always been up and comers and, no names and whatnot. So, it's just been a combination of like, star power coming back into it, people putting a little bit more money into it. And then The Conjuring, it made really good money at the box office too. So that's when people started saying like, we can make good horror movies that are entertaining, are well made with good performances and still make money. Like what? So I'd say the 2013 James Wan The Conjuring is kind of like what kicked it off. And then It Follows is another one that kind of came out shortly after that, like got people back into like the art house side of horror as well. So those two movies were big in this kind of resurgence of horror that we got going on.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot of facets to The Conjuring that are really interesting, and again, that is a movie that I haven't seen yet because hearing that it's based on a true story really kind of amps it up for me, and I think that may have amped it up for a lot of audiences as well, because you can go into any other horror movies, I don't know, like The Exorcism or something like that, and I don't believe that's based on a true story, but even though that movie will scare your pants off, at the end of the day, you can say, oh yeah, it's just a movie. But The Conjuring, it's based on true files from, remind me again was it the Warrens?
The Warrens, yeah. Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Yeah, it's based on their true accounts. So there is something a little bit more under the surface that creeps you out there. And then on the business level, there is Blumhouse, who has just kind of over the past few years kind of become a powerhouse of their own, because what they would do is they make these smaller budget horror movies, and then even when they're not good, they make some good money back. Mm-hmm. And then when you have a movie like The Conjuring, it just makes it all the more money because it is a better quality movie.
Yeah. Well, horror's always made money. I mean, like, it always has. It's always dominated the box office with these small budgets and stuff, but they'd be such small budget and people wouldn't really put any effort into it. You'd get these kind of directors for hire that would just put stuff out to make you money. But, like, what's interesting now, and especially, like, you got people like Blumhouse or, an A24 even, horror, it's kind of like a win-win situation, because you can find these really hungry directors that like want to tell stories, and you can give them their freedom to tell their stories the way they want because you're going to give them a small to modest budget. And even Blumhouse, is kind of been putting out some mid range budget horror movies as well and still getting big returns. But like I say, you can find these hungry directors you still give them their freedom, let them make the movie they want to make. You're still going to make money regardless if the movie's good or not, but it's always a plus if the movie is good. And then the word of mouth continues on from there, like Get Out, Jordan Peele came to Blumhouse with this crazy idea, and Blumhouse said, sure, you can make it. We're only going to give you like $16 million. And he said, all right. And then, and look what it did.
And next thing you know, he's nominated for Academy Awards.
Winning Academy
Awards. Is there something to be said that horror may actually be one of the most versatile genres? Because I know there was a saying kind of going around in the movie space that horror is one of the hardest genres to nail really well, but you have, like you said, a lot of, mostly when horror, like the pre-resurgence, you would have really unexperienced directors kind of just getting their foot in the door in Hollywood and making these really shitty horror movies. But so on some level, it is horror is a good stepping stone, but it really is hard to make a really great horror movie. So is there something to be said that horror can be actually the most versatile genre? Because even looking now, you have horror movies such as, the Purge franchise, which kind of goes into action, or a movie like Raw last year, which is almost a coming of age horror movie, or Get Out, where it's a political movie, it's political drama mixed in with comedy and horror.
Yeah, I 100% think that horror is the most versatile genre. What draws me into the franchise, not only, watching horror, but also, for me wanting to create, horror films myself, is I think that you can tell stories using the horror genre that you can't always tell in other genres, because you're not confined to these restraints of reality. You can break the rules, you can kind of do what you want to do, so you can make these interesting stories. And people are blending all these different genres because there's so many different subgenres too. Like, horror still doesn't have like the best rap. I can still say horror and I will always find somebody that's like, ew, I hate horror movies, all horror movies suck. I can still find those people. But when you get into these subgenres, and then people get a little bit more interested because it's leans a certain direction. Like you said, it can be a whether it's a psychological thriller, whether it's something gory, like you said, Raw, a coming of age horror story. We do have just so many versatile. But like I said, I think you can tell these very interesting stories, and you said it's a stepping stone for young directors, but something that's also been great recently is you get these directors going back into horror, like, established directors, I mean, Guillermo del Toro's still been doing it for, his whole entire career, but you got people like James Gunn, he went back into it with the Belko Experiment, and he's got another horror movie coming out, so he's kind of getting back into the genre. There's a few other, like, established directors getting back into it too, so, and as well as established actors. You got all these big names doing horror now. Quentin Tarantino has finally given us a horror movie, that we've been begging for.
Yeah. I mean, you got directors like Alex Garland as well, who just very recently, I would classify Annihilation as a horror movie. At the very least, have you seen Annihilation?
Yeah, I'd say it's a sci-fi horror for sure.
Yeah, at the very least, that bear scene is some really good horror. That scared me.
Oh, the good old scare bear.
Yeah, and even horror directors, classically horror directors, they because of the resurgence of horror and because of the films that they have been allowed to make in the good quality, they're getting a lot bigger opportunities. I mean, look at Jay Bayona. One of the horror movies I have seen is The Orphanage, in Spanish from him, and now he's getting the opportunity to direct huge blockbusters such as Jurassic World 2, and then you look at James Wan, who he has the opportunity to direct Aquaman now after coming from Conjuring, and he's still involved in the Conjuring franchise, and the horror can be really good for the entire studio system.
Exactly, and it's been it's been great from streaming as well. So many more horror movies are being seen now these days because of all the different streaming avenues and ways to see them, because mainstream, a lot of mainstream horror, the stuff that goes to theaters is, we still get a good mix of really shitty horror movies that like make it to theaters, and that's the ones that are still giving people a bad rap. And I tell people, I'm like, no, there's so many good horror movies out there, you just gotta find them. But that's another big thing with the resurgence, the past 5 years with Netflix and Amazon Prime. We have Shudder now, which is exclusively horror movies, which is amazing.
That was the thing. That's pretty cool.
Oh, it's amazing. It has TV shows, it has like movies, but it's like all like the very art house horror. So if you but it also has like classic horror too. So it's like, people can find these cool indie horrors, these small indie horrors like Raw, like The Ritual on Netflix is doing really well, has gotten really good praise, which is also fantastic. If you guys haven't seen The Ritual, definitely check that one out. It's super good. But yeah, so streaming has definitely changed the game for horror as well.
So as someone who, basically this entire time I'm saying that I don't like horror, but it's not for the reasons that many people have maybe come up to you and said that they don't like horror. It's me. I can't handle the scares, although I do respect the genre itself, and when I do see them, I usually end up loving the good ones. Now, if you could, as a someone who is a self-proclaimed horror aficionado, what are some good movies for people like myself or other people who faint of heart, I would say, who are trying to foray into the world of horror just because I personally want to explore what the genre has to offer? I mean, if you look at even right now, there's A Quiet Place that's coming out that I'm really excited to see. But movies like that, or any movies that you think are a good stepping stone for people who are just trying to start off.
Yeah, good stepping stone. My go-to stepping stone, if you want to start off with a classic, somewhat big name, not too scary, but still pretty scary, is Nightmare on Elm Street. I'd say is one of the better stepping stones because, like I said, it kind of has a good mix of you get horror, but you kind of have a little bit of campiness in there as well. But it's also a horror movie that has some depth to it, has something to say about growing up and about facing your fears and things like that. And then it spawns a franchise, so it's like that's a good one to step into because then you watch that one. If you're into it, you can continue and watch more Freddy Krueger if you really like Freddy, and then you can explore into other ones. Or my other big one is one of my favorites is if you're a little bit more brave and you're trying to get into the horror world is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. If you want to really see what some pure horror is, just pure crazy insanity, just weirdness, you put on Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It is just good from start to finish. But not only that, it was super ahead of its time. It has great cinematography, great score to it as well. So if you're like, somebody that's like, I want to really dive into horror, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is my go-to to start with as well. But, if you're just trying to ease your way into it, Nightmare on Elm Street's a pretty good place to start, and you'll kind of figure out if, you like the slasher, subgenre or not. Okay, you don't like slashers, let's try something psychological maybe. If you want something good psychological, Silence of the Lambs is a really good one. If you want something that's not going to actually scare you, but is still going to creep you the hell out. If you like psychological, I'd say that's a good place to start as well. But, there's all sorts of different stuff. But, like I said, if you go on Netflix right now and you just kind of just start browsing, like, you can get yourself into a hole and find all kinds of stuff that you like.
What gave me an idea there is there are within horror, there are few genres. Like you have your psychological, you're more in the mind horror, and then you have the very gory and the very bloody horrors. Which ones do you prefer? Do you prefer ones that are just outright, slashers and kind of blood everywhere and guts spilling everywhere, and that's stuff that I actually don't mind. I maybe it speaks to my character a little bit. Maybe I'm a little messed up, but I don't mind seeing blood or severed hands or whatever. What I do get freaked out is the stuff that's in my head because I can't get out of my own head.
That's a good point. I never really thought about that, because like once blood's gone, it's gone. But yeah, as far as my favorite subgenres, I mean, I love bloody. Like I've been watching horror since I was 7, so I'm pretty desensitized to a lot of things. So I want things bloody, I want things violent, I want them crazy weird. But as far as like subgenres go, I'm a sucker for if a I like possession movies a lot. The Conjuring is a great one. The Exorcism of Emily Rose is another really good one. The possession subgenre, it's very formulaic, but if you do it well and you bring something interesting to it, I'm a sucker for a good possession movie. Um, Same with found footage. If you have a good reason for the found footage to be used and you use it very well, I think found footage works uber well because, like I said, if you can justify using it, then it makes it feel a little bit more realistic. Grave Encounters is one of my favorite horror movies ever. And then I like some black comedy horror as well, and I do like slashers. American Psycho would be my favorite horror movie, and that falls under, I guess, could be a slasher if you look at, but it's definitely a psychological and black comedy horror. So those are usually where I lean.
All right, I have another question for you. You mentioned that you've been watching horror movies since you were 7. Now, what was the big ones that really drew you in? So as 7-year-old DeVaughn, you're watching TV, and what's the one that you saw and you're like, holy crap, I really love this genre. I want to see more heads being cut off, or I want to see more possessions.
So like I said, Nightmare on Elm Street was one of my first ones I saw. My mom showed me that. I remember we watched it in broad daylight. And I was still terrified, and like that kind of spoke to the power of that movie, and being scared to go to sleep, like, cause like that's the one place you can't really run away from. So that was one of my first. I remember, like I said, I guess I started my I started strengthening my stomach pretty early. The Fly. My uncle showed me The Fly when I was like 7, and it was so gross, and it's amazing. I love it. I was just like, Jeff Goldblum, Gina Davis, just some good old Carpenter. The Fly, like that. That really was a good one. And then uh, the third one that like really got me, which this is a underrated gem that's on Netflix. Actually, the whole franchise is on Netflix. The Cube.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody check out The Cube, it's from the 90s, and it's basically it was Saw before Saw was a thing. These like people get they wake up trapped in this cube, and each room is a cube as well, and certain rooms are booby trapped. And so they have to like navigate through the rooms to try to escape and avoid the booby traps. And a lot of the booby traps are like people getting sliced up and stuff, and all sorts of like acid and things like that. It's a crazy weird sci-fi horror movie, and I remember being shown that whenever I was a kid. So those 3 movies, like I was shown those whenever I was 7, and it's been downhill ever since then.
So I guess your family is pretty invested into the horror thing.
Oh yeah, like my family, we're big into movies, and it's funny. My dad absolutely hates them, but my mom loves them, and my sisters do too. So like we all watch a bunch of horror movies together. But yeah, like we're a big movie family in general.
I think it's funny because one of the first movies that I had heard about as a kid being in the horror genre was The Exorcism, and I distinctly remember where I was when my mom was like, that was the scariest movie I ever watched. I didn't sleep for like 2 days after that when the head turns around. And that's when I kind of just like, no, that's not for me. I'm going to stick with, my Lion King or whatever and have fun with those. I do not need any of that. And my dad had mentioned that he was extremely grossed out by the Fly transformation. And I still have yet to, man up and check that out. But I do love me some Goldblum, so it might be in the future for me.
It's arguably, I mean, you can at me on Twitter at Jesus12 if you dispute this, but The Fly is peak hot Jeff Goldblum. Like there's a scene he comes out of a teleportation pod naked, and his hair is all oiled up perfectly and everything. Like, yeah, he's real hot in Jurassic Park, but like The Fly is peak hot Jeff Goldblum. You heard it here.
You heard it here first. Jeff Goldblum was the best he ever was in Fly. Just one last question before we head into break and switch topics to something less scary. The future of horror. I had mentioned A Quiet Place that's coming out soon. There's even comic book movies now that are all the rage, are starting to venture into horror whenever New Mutants actually decides to release. What's a few movies that are on your radar? I know you like some of the self-proclaimed weirder movies and the smaller movies. What are some movies that you could recommend in the future that are coming out for people to look out for?
Some ones that are coming out soon. I'm really excited for Hereditary. It's a new one from A24. I can't really explain it to you because I've avoided all information about this movie.
Fair.
I accidentally saw like 60 seconds of the trailer and it looks bonkers. But it looks crazy, and A24 is known for, their unique movies. So I'm super excited for that one. There's a movie that's been making its round at festivals. I'm not sure when it'll be out. I think it'll be out on VOD here in a month or so. But there's a movie called Mom and Dad starring Nicolas Cage, and I hear he is peak Cage in this thing. It's like apparently the kids, I think like something goes wrong, like the kids go crazy, so like the parents like have to like fight them off or something, or I don't know. But Cage, I love that Nicolas Cage is actually in like 2 horror movies coming out this year. He's in that one, and then he's in a horror movie called I forget what the name of the other one is, but Nicolas Cage is actually in 2 horror movies this year, and that just makes me happy in itself. So that's something you can always look out for.
That Mom and Dad one sounds like a cathartic movie for any parents who are just getting frustrated with their kids. It's like they get into a fight with their kids, you know, their kids come home late or whatever. It's just like, let's go see mom and dad and watch these parents just take it out on their kids.
Yep, pretty much.
And having Nick Cage there is always a plus, because especially if he's hamming it up or caging it up, they really gotta like coin a phrase just for Nicolas Cage, because there's hamming it
just
up,
cages
and
it up.
Yeah,
you
then
know?
there's Nicolas Cage just doing whatever he does, and
I mean, if it's anything close to how cagey he gets in 2006's The Wicker Man, then I'm all for Nicolas Cage being in horror movies all the time.
And you know what? I don't really have much to say that. I hear The Wicker Man and I just get, you know, crazy. I have no idea what to say about The Wicker Man. So we're going to take a break here. I think that's enough horror for me for a while. I just hearing about this is going to freak me out for the rest of the night. So I'm going to take a really quick break here, and then we're going to come back in the free chat segment and talk about some podcasting. And we are back for the free chat segment with Jesus, aka DeVaughn, aka is that the only name you? I feel like you have more names,
dude. Like, I mean, I do have more names, but like in real life, like, I mean, as far as the internet goes, yeah, it's DeVaughn or Jesus. Like, that's pretty much it as far as the internet goes. Mainly Jesus, but then like no, like at work, I have like 18 different nicknames. Like, people call me Prince. I mean, like Devondra, I got all sorts of weird names. Like, everybody has a different name for me. But as far as the internet's concerned, just call me Jesus.
I remember growing up, I had so many different nicknames because Matthew was such a common name where I was. I grew up in like the whitest neighborhood ever, so there was like a million Matthews, and for a time it was Matthew C, and then I actually had like a vaguely racist nickname in the past that nobody actually realized it was racist, and I went by that for all of high school. And I remember
what was it?
It was Chinks. So like.
Oh my gosh! And you did that for high school?
Yeah. Well, it had started in. This has nothing to do with podcasting, by the way, guys. This is just a free, you know, anecdote. It happened in grade 6, and one of my friends was like, my last name is Chin-Quee, and they're like, I don't know, let's just take the end off and just add an S. And nobody realized it was racist. And then I went to high school and started, you know, introducing myself as that. And I distinctly remember it was grade 9 business class. I was sitting there, and one of my friends introduced me to the teacher. He was like, "Oh, this is Chinks," and the professor, I keep saying professor, the teacher just paused. He's like, "Excuse me," and, and that took a while to kind of one, shake off. Some people still do call me that from high school, and two, it's try to explain it to the teacher. That was a whole mess.
That's hilarious.
Well, getting to the topic at hand, podcasting. Now, I know a lot of people like to listen to podcasts, and a couple of people I know, especially in the movie space, are trying to start their own podcast. And I wouldn't say that I always get questions of how I do it, but I have gotten them occasionally, and a lot recently, actually. And I'm sure you have, DeVaughn. So, DeVaughn, how did you get started podcasting?
Yeah, like my inbox is definitely full of lots of people asking podcast questions. I got started because I have a friend in town who's like an actual, like, he's like a certified critic, and he's a podcaster. Shout out to Aaron Dicer. But I went on his podcast, and I thought it was fun. I was like, oh, this is really cool. So I thought it was fun. And I was like, well, I want to start a podcast. And I also realized that just a lot of pundits in general, like people in the movie space, it's just kind of another way to get your voice out, you know, to get thoughts out, to get content. And so I was like, okay, you know, I should start a podcast, you know, because I was doing YouTube, and then YouTube wasn't really working out for me at the time, which, I mean, I still do YouTube. I never really stopped, but I just wasn't happy with it at the time. So I was like, all right, let me try podcasting out. And so I asked him like kind of how he got started. And then really I just I found this great article that like broke it down into like 5 steps on like how to start your own podcast. And I shared this article with everybody that asked me for it. But basically it just like it breaks it down from like the equipment to start off with, the software, like how to go through, website hosting and stuff, because all that is really confusing if you're not really a computer person, not too tech savvy. So like that kind of took a minute to learn that, but it really just breaks it down for you pretty standardly. But I think as podcasting is like been steadily growing the past 2 years, it's become a lot easier, and like there's a lot of like websites to where you can they'll record it straight to the website and like edit it there and like do it all. I do everything kind of manually. I use a mixer and everything and record it and go through the process. But like you can do it all on your phone even these days, run an entire podcast. So it's kind of gotten a little bit easier as it's grown.
So my setup is pretty simple. I have my Blue Yeti mic that I purchased on sale because full price is a little bit hefty, and I'd say it's like maybe middle class in terms of USB mics. And I don't know if you use a USB mic, but for me it's just it's easier for if I'm going back home, because I go back home and come back to school a lot. But for you, what is your setup like? Do you have a USB mic? Do you have a proper actual mic?
Yeah, so I'm a bit of a snob. Like this is, and the article's great too, because it'll kind of tell you like, okay, if you're wanting to go the cheaper route, go this way. If you want to spend a little more money, go this way. If you want the best quality, go this way. So another great thing about this article, it's on ostraining.com, and you just like look up podcasting.
I'll for sure link that in the description.
Yeah. But so I'm a snob. I really like good quality. And I also just at the time that I was about to start the podcast, I just happened to have a lot of money at the time. I was working 2 jobs. I just had a bunch of extra money. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go out. I'm going to buy some good equipment and I'm going to do it that way. So, like I said, I do it manually, and I kind of do it probably the more complicated way. But like I said, it's for the good quality. So I run mine through a mixer. So I have my what's the brand on it? I can't see from this far away, but I got my mixer going. So I use a full-on mixer with like sound effects and stuff on it, and you can run up to 4 microphones in it, so that makes it a lot easier as well. And then I use like auxiliary, like studio style microphones. So I have Shure SM58s, which is like studio level, like kind of like entry level studio quality. So pretty good. They're about like, $85 a piece. And then, like I said, because I sometimes have a lot of people going, so I like to have lots of options. And then with a mixer, you can also, run your laptop, like sound effects into it, music from your phone, things like that. And then you just run that mixer into, some people run it straight into our laptops and record on Audacity. I also do not, because like I said, I like making things harder on myself. I record onto a recorder, and that's mainly just because I don't really trust software, because the, bad thing about, recording straight onto your laptop into software, things crash or your laptop might die anything could happen. A number of things can happen. I do it analog onto a recorder, so that way, not the only thing that could ever go wrong with it is if the battery dies, but I usually just hook the recorder up into my laptop for power. So like, it never crashes on me. It never has. And just makes everything, like I said, safer, I guess. It takes a little bit more time, but then, like I said, the quality comes out really clean, because the mixer kind of takes everything and then, mixes it together in there, versus having to do a little bit more editing in Audacity. So just comes out with a cleaner sound. So, my advice to people always is, if you do have the money to, get the expensive equipment, instead of starting off small and then, having to eventually upgrade, if you have the money, go ahead and, just get the nicer things, I'd say, or even the mid level stuff. The Blue Yeti is a pretty popular podcasting mic, so you definitely can't go wrong there. But so that's the way I run my stuff.
Yeah, hearing about that mixer, just I was sitting there, I was like, oh my god, that is so much easier, just for the upfront cost. Because the Blue Yeti, you're right, it's a great mic, but going into Audacity, if you're not in a nice room, I'm just recording in my room, which is right beside, I have to unplug my fridge and whatever because it makes so much noise, and even then you have to do a lot of editing. I think I have in Audacity, there is a really neat ability to create a chain, so you can just always do the same effects over on the audio. I mean, even then, it's a pain in the ass. It has to run for like 10 minutes. Whereas if you have your mixer, that does sound like a pretty nice life. And you're absolutely right about the recording. Audacity has given me some problems before. I've had to scrap entire episodes after recording for like an hour, just because it didn't work. And I can tell you that is one of the most frustrating things in the world. It's not like Microsoft Word where it crashes and it has, your saved recovery files. If it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
completely agree with going that recorder route if you have the money.
Yeah, like I said, like I mean, I have a nice Tascam recorder that was about $100, and the mixer was $100. So if you got the extra money on it, go ahead and go for it. But it's definitely like not required. Like I said, like some people even you can get a good pair of headphones that has a microphone on it and use that even like if you don't want to get a USB microphone. So there's a lot of different ways to go about it.
Yeah, I know our mutual friend Roman, who he informs me, I was just playing Fortnite with him. He informs me that you're going to be on his podcast later. He records on his headset, and if you go back a couple episodes, the audio sounded just fine to me. So there are definitely many avenues that you can go. Now, just one last thing with the podcasting, kind of podcasting tips. There is a huge podcasting network that many people may not know about. Do you want to talk a little bit about the so-called Podern family on Twitter, and maybe even expanded elsewhere? I've only really looked into the Twitter area.
Yeah, there's a big podcasting community, and that's another like really easy way to kind of learn stuff. There's a lot of different podcasting Facebook groups as well, and the Facebook groups are pretty great. Like you can go in there and ask people questions, and there's people that you can find an editor in there if you want somebody to like edit podcasts for you or like things like that. Like people are very helpful like whenever you're just getting into the podcasting community, and it's kind of like a very much a you support them, they'll support you, and so everybody tries to be like on the level. And like I said, like you said, Twitter Podern family, the like hashtag is pretty much like the Twitter community, and it's just people share, people help review each other's podcasts as well, and people are just like very supportive, which is a lot more than I can say about like the YouTube community. Sometimes like YouTube, everybody's kind of more focused on their channels and themselves and things like that, versus podcasting, everybody wants to help each other, or wants to collaborate on different podcasts as well. So it's super great. So if like if you're starting off and it's like kind of intimidating, there's a lot of different places you can go to like ask people for help and stuff.
Yeah, I will say that when I started off, it was pretty intimidating to start even marketing my own or promoting my own podcast. But then you just look into the Podern family hashtag, or I haven't really looked much into the podcasting Facebook groups, but it sounds very similar. It's got to be one of the most supportive online communities, and in a world that is dominated by online communities filled with just toxic people. It's really nice and a great breath of fresh air, because they have a policy. You retweet someone and they retweet you, and then if you guest on them, they'll have you, or if you guest on theirs, they'll come on yours and whatnot, and help each other review on iTunes and whatnot, and give pointers. I remember when I had first started, there was a live stream from a fellow podcaster who was giving tips for beginners of how to promote and how to use the hashtag, and how to work with other people. So it is really helpful for anybody who's starting off. I don't claim to be an expert or anything, but as someone who's kind of been in the community for near a year now, going there really helped that transition of being a non-podcaster to someone who podcasts mostly weekly. Well,
Yeah,
that
for
seems like
sure.
all the that seems like all the time that we have today. DeVaughn, I really want to thank you for coming on finally to this podcast. Where can people find you?
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. It was a good time talking some spooky movies and whatnot. The people can find me on Twitter at Deezus12, Deezus. I'm just always there talking about whatever movies is going on, and that's where I post any of my things. But I have a YouTube channel, which is also Deezus12. It's just got vlogs, and it'll have some short films on there coming up. And Deezus.org is where you can find all my writings. I write for a little website called Nightmare on Film Street. It is all about horror and genre movies. So definitely check out some of my articles on there. Oh, and because, yeah, I'm also, podcasts. I haven't been podcasting in a minute, but if you want to check out Deezus Take the Reel, it is a very fun podcast where we talk movies and weird life things. It's been on hiatus for a minute, but it's all still there, and there's a lot of episodes to go on there. And I've had a lot of YouTube Collider Screen Junkie people on there, so go check that out.
Yeah, you've had some pretty big names on there. I think the biggest name I've had was, RB3 from the Schmoes, but you had, Alicia Malone, and to those who aren't in the community don't really know who that is, but that's some pretty big names. And I think the best feature of your YouTube channel is the vlogs where you're literally taking a shit and answering people's shitty opinions. I really like that, so definitely check that out. For me, you guys can check me out on Chin-Quee 96 on Twitter, or my new website, which is a hub for everything, matthewchinquee.pagecloud.com. I'll have a blog related to this episode, maybe up if I don't get lazy, and check out the podcast page, which has links to anywhere this podcast can be found: iTunes, Spotify, you name it, and then direct links to the episode. But until next week, I will chat with you guys later.
Hi-ho, Kermit the Frog here. Hi-ho, Kermit the Frog here.